Alright, hello and welcome everyone to the final Incarnons build update video. Obviously, new update is out and there's a lot to do and a lot of things to go over with it, but this is the final week update for all of the Incarnons that come from the circuit weeklies. So, if you're still getting those, this is the second best, maybe the best, depending upon your personal opinion, week of Incarnons, so we gotta finish this up and go over it. Obviously, there are now videos for all of the previous 7 weeks, so when week 1 rolls back around next week, that video already exists, and you can see all of the builds on the site, and the link is in the description below, and so on and so forth, if you want the over-under on all of the Incarnons. But this week, we're finishing up with the Sybaris, the Sicarus, the Dera, the Cestra, and the Okina. And as you can see here, these weapons are all incredible. They are all phenomenal. I would once again like to note that the S- on the Okina is only because of the S ranks available this week. I think the Okina is probably the worst of them, because the Sybaris and the Sicarus just are absolutely nuts. Not because the Okina is bad or some nonsense. The Okina is also absolutely incredible, but I think that it has more comparable options that are similar to it versus something like the Sybaris or the Sicarus. So with that out of the way, we're going to be, of course, going in order as they appear here, starting with the Sybaris and the Sicarus, which these are the two best things this week. They are ridiculously good. The Sybaris, of course, is, a pretty standard, I guess I would say, build here. Maybe one of the weirder things is that I do really believe that this weapon should be on primary deadhead, and we are on primary deadhead plus stabilizer to give this weapon no recoil whatsoever, as we are on the -50 from deadhead and the -60 from stabilizer. So this thing is going to be an absolute laser beam, much like the Dera, which we're going to talk about soon. And the build is fairly standard. It is on galvanized aptitude, as this weapon does get basically guaranteed blast whenever you evolve it, giving us 6 total statuses, meaning the galvanized aptitude is incredibly potent here. And it is worth noting that the ramp up on this weapon kind of doesn't exist. Obviously, like, you want to ramp up deadhead and you want to ramp up aptitude and galvanized chamber, but much like weapons like the Latron, this weapon does so much damage that ramp up is only going to exist on the hardiest and toughest motherfuckers that Warframe has to offer. I'm talking about like Demolists at level 1000 and things like that. That's where you're going to see that ramp up happen. So we get the opportunity to use all these ramp up things and just never notice the difference for the first 1000 levels of the game in basically any content. If the enemy is not attenuated, chances are they will be instantly vaporized by this weapon, regardless of whether or not you've gotten headshots with deadhead or whatever. Also, because this weapon gets blast inherently whenever it is evolved, it is also getting a nice AoE effect to it, which is, of course, incredible. Now, to quickly show this, we have, of course, our usual group who are... I could add a 0 to the enemy level here, and it wouldn't really matter too much for them. I'm going to keep it very real. They stand no chance. The one thing about this weapon is that sometimes it can be a little awkward to get it charged. It charges a little bit slower, but it has an absolute ton of Incarnon ammo. So once you get it going, you don't have to fire very much in order to just take down hordes and hordes of enemies. It is ridiculously powerful. These enemies are like you're not really seeing like a lot of the statuses that this can output. Many of those enemies just died from some residual blast procs on dying enemies. It's obscene. Now that we're charged up, though, we can show this on a demo, which I would like to do because they are actually a reasonably tough target for this thing to shoot and kill. If you've seen me kill this with Mesa and Ash and such, you know that that's stupid what I just did. That is dumb. That is with no additional buffs, like no Molecular Prime or Eclipse like I have available here on Nova. No nothing. The Demolisher is just dead. So, yeah, this weapon's absolutely insane. It has like really reasonable AoE with blast. It has insane single target damage. Its ammo pool is incredible. It is sometimes a little bit hard to charge, but that's more so because the main form also does amazing damage. And for anyone that's wanting to know, because I know this question comes up a lot, the Sybaris Prime is a little bit better in the main form of the gun versus the Dex Sybaris, but the Dex Sybaris and the Sybaris Prime perform basically identically in terms of their performance once they are in Incarnon form, which can actually sometimes be a little bit of an advantage for the Dex Sybaris because it means it might be a little bit easier to charge whenever you are in that regular form because it is weaker. So in some scenarios, you may actually desire the main form of your gun to be a little bit worse. So that is a consideration to be made on the Sybaris. So absolutely nuts weapon, 100%. my suggestion alongside the one we're talking about now, the Sicarus, for this week if you had to only pick 2, which you do. With that, let's talk about the Sicarus. Now, the Sicarus, obviously, whenever it released the Incarnate, it had a little bit of a bug going on that multiplied its damage by like 500,000 million infinity damage. But after that, they buffed it to make sure it didn't feel too bad whenever they fixed that, and it is insane. It is one of the best secondaries in the game. It's actually maybe one of the kind of under-mentioned secondaries whenever we're in the conversation about things like the Dual Toxicus and the Furus Incarnon and all of that good business. This weapon is absolutely stellar. It's like phenomenal at both group clear and like just single target stuff. Like we can do the same Demolist test with this thing. One of the big benefits of this is that because it is Cascadia Flare and because it has such an easy time building up Cascadia Flare, there's really no on-ramp for this thing at all. It kind of just does its whole ramp in pretty much instantly on anything that can survive a couple of shots because Cascadia Flare will build up so quickly. So there's really no on-ramp for this. You can kind of just use it. It charges insanely fast. It has a ton of ammo, and it is absolutely phenomenal. In fact, I would say that there's like, you know, if there wasn't like the easy 2 S's I could give, if there were 3 S's and I didn't think the Okina was maybe the worst of the bunch, if it was more even with the Sybaris, there's definitely a real argument for, I think, the Sicarus to be at an S+ for this week to really enforce that you should pick this one, definitely. But just to show this against the groups, you will see the insane charge rate of this thing, just absolutely incredible. And then, of course, it has the ricochet rounds that just kill everybody. Just absolutely phenomenal. I do not have Merciless Gunfight on this because I really don't personally feel that the Sicarus needs it, but you can absolutely make room for it on this build. And then just to show like that same Demolist test, because this weapon is one that is really rife for it, and it's, you know, one of the things that is worth showing about it, because it is very good for this type of content. I will unevolve this. Instantly charge, basically. You can see even the main form doing some pretty significant damage there. And then just kind of like ridiculous single target damage output for this thing. This thing does not have like, it's meant for groups, but this is the single target output that you can get out of it with just the same build you would usually use on groups of enemies. Absolutely phenomenal. Just incredible, incredible weapons. Of course, the whole list of weapons here is pretty much incredible. The Cestra is at an A- here just because I think it's ever so slightly worse than the Dera with the Dera's new build. But these weapons are also ones that I think you're absolutely going to want to pick up. We, of course, have the Dera Vandal. And then the only Cestra is, unfortunately, the just regular old Cestra. So that's, you know, no special version there. Unfortunately, there's no single Sicarus Cestra to go into. But the Dera Vandal, to start us off here, pretty standard things that you're seeing from the build here. There is some interesting stuff to mention with this because of the last passive here, which is increase base critical chance by 25% of current status chance up to 35%. So we're not maxing out that passive as a default, but Crux will max out that passive for us whenever it triggers. So that is actually the reason why we're going into Hellfire instead of our dual status, because we don't need the dual status because all the status that we need is covered by primary Crux. And this is a little bit better weighting into our heat and will also give us a better multiplier for our heat procs so that they are much stronger. So that is why we are on Hellfire, just to explain, you know, not confuse anybody. And overall, I mean, like the rest of the build is kind of the usual suspects that you might expect. Galvanized Aptitude is actually here much for the same reasons that it is on the Sybaris, because this weapon is incredibly powerful and just, you know, whether you ramp or not is going to get the job done. So this is like pretty much what we're on here. And this is, of course, a ton of damage because we do have like plenty of statuses on this. We have the 6 total statuses with 7 against Eximus because of magnetic breaking and turning into electricity. So Galvanized Aptitude can put in some very, very serious work there. So this weapon is, again, absolutely amazing. Its first passive notably combines with Crux to make it so that it is infinite ammo. Just straight up, like, completely infinite ammo. You got to get a couple kills for it. But then this is just, it is a laser beam that enemies don't like very much. You have good punch through on this build, and you can just shoot this thing forever. Very similar to the position that the Boltor Incarnon is in now. Obviously, we'll go back down and eventually start using ammo, but not particularly quickly. So this weapon can essentially just fire forever as long as you do have enemies. To show off the Incarnon part of this, though, the Incarnon part is actually not a huge amount different. It's one of the things for this that is kind of the reason why it is in an A rank, is that, like, the main fire is stellar, but I don't think the Incarnon fire is really that much better. Obviously, it's going to be, like, these big, chunkier hits, and it's going to be able to take out enemies very well, but it's not actually that crazy. Just to do, like, the, you know, we're doing the Demolisher here, because all of these weapons are actually quite good at this. But yeah, you can get some like very serious performance here. You can see that doing significant damage. This weapon does kind of need to ramp up, I will say, in order to get this performance here. But it's really, really good for these types of targets as well. Absolutely phenomenal Incarnon weapon. This week, like, you know, the Dera Vandal I was a little bit down on before Crux's release, but with Crux's release, it's just really insane. Now, the Cestra is one where it's a really heavy investment. I'm going to tell you that right now. The investment on this is very heavy. I do feel like you really do want steady hands on this weapon. And because of that, this is a 7 Forma build, which is not low. For that, though, I do feel like this weapon is quite good. And it's also a weirdo. Because if we look at what we've got going on here, we've got like the 18% crit chance, but 9.2 crit multiplier. And on the Incarnon form, it is a 38.2 crit multiplier with 150% crit chance. And you will get an additional 200% crit chance from this weapon's Incarnon form if you continue to fire it, which means you have an incredibly high crit chance and an insanely high critical multiplier. Alongside, of course, like we were using Deadhead, which is giving us a more significant headshot multiplier. And of course, we have Merciless Gunfight now, which is not only helping with that insanely high critical multiplier, is also giving us Punch Through to help us with groups. And it just comes together to be like a very, very solid weapon, with the only real problem being that compared to something like the Sicarus, this doesn't have projectiles that bounce all over the room and kill everyone involved in this zip code. So that's really where the downside comes in. The actual damage output is incredibly good. It's worth noting that up here I have Must Evolve versus No Ramp. So no ramp, this build is just using Hornet Strike and it's using Enervate. And this is a build that makes it so that the main fire is much more functional because Enervate really helps the main fire a lot. And it makes it so like you're kind of able to use both forms very effectively, and you don't need to ramp into any given thing. I will say just in general, I would really suggest this build instead. I think it's just more consistent and better overall, but this was a consideration, and that's why it exists at all. For that, though, showing off the Cestra, this thing is really solid. Obviously, it is a single target thing, so it's going to do single target stuff. But that's why the punch through is, of course, going to be helping us a ton, as opposed to a weapon like the Sicarus, where the punch through is not even needed in order to clear groups incredibly fast. We're going to get that very high crit chance on this as we continue to fire. And it, like, just chunks down groups very considerably fast. Like, we have a good amount of Incarnon ammo. We used about half of it clearing that group. Not bad at all. Good stuff, and, like, very powerful. Just to show this against the demo, as it is actually, once again, quite strong against them. Although you will want to get headshots with this one, I will say that. Here, I'll just put this down. You can see the very fast charge rate on this, which is stellar. And then just, usually you're not even going to get to like your full crit ramp on these types of situations. You do need to be ramped up to see that performance. Of course, you need the deadhead kills and so on and so forth. You'll have to like, shoot some other enemies and build up that way. Though you can option select into flare, so you don't need to build the deadhead stacks. That is definitely an option on this weapon if you are taking it to a disruption. That's probably what I would suggest you do. But again, another phenomenal weapon. It is probably the worst this week, which just means it's fucking incredible, but worse than the other absolutely insane weapons that are available this week, with our last weapon being the Okina. Now, the Okina are very interesting. They're extremely comparable to the Nami Solo, but they have a couple of advantages. Their Incarnate form actually makes it so that whenever you get kills, you generate daggers that will be cold damage and proc cold damage on enemies, and that will also add magnetic damage because it's going to combine with, obviously, the electric damage that this weapon is going to use because it is an influence build. Those daggers can also proc influence. Well, they can use influence. They won't turn it on, but they can use influence to spread those magnetic and cold procs around, meaning that we can use condition overload very effectively in this build. And then otherwise, we are just, kind of on the place where, guess what, we're doing influence stuff. I know you're very, very surprised. It's really good at it. I will say that this weapon, there are some interesting builds you can set up, like with Saren, and I believe it also works with Volt, where you can actually make the daggers that it generates generate more daggers, and you can kind of just have them fly out and continue to kill enemies as a passive thing that you just have on you. And I believe you can also do that with Zadas on Warframes like Frost and such, which is a consideration. This weapon, not appropriate for killing Demolists, as most melee weapons are not. But it is incredibly, incredibly good. Doing that Discipline's Merit to, of course, like very easily evolve this, and just like, incredible damage output. I do not have the, the combo timer increased here, so we're not even going to see this thing get to max combo. But like, it doesn't need to. I mean, it's clearing this group at like what, we're at 6x combo maybe. basically, yeah, 6x combo, and like everyone here is dead. And I was just trying to stop before the procs would have just killed everyone. Obviously, Influence gives this a very large AoE. The floating daggers will help you initiate fights. It is 10 stacks of cold, so this also is going to CC enemies to hell, meaning that they have basically nothing to do to fight back against you whenever you are using this weapon. And it's, again, just stellar. I would say this is maybe... There's a very real argument that this is the second best melee Incarnon in the game, right behind Nami Solo. I think it's a very, very strong argument that that is the case. Incredibly powerful weapon. And it's incredible in both its forms, too. Even if you do not have this evolved into an Incarnon mode, the regular Okina Prime is a very, very good weapon. And you really can't go wrong this week. It's just great all the way around. All of them are phenomenal. They're all weapons that you could bring pretty much anywhere. Obviously, the Okina, not appropriate for something like Demolus, but absolutely phenomenal week. You're going to want to pick up every single one of these. Like, this is going to be, like, there's other weeks where it's like, hey, maybe you do it once and pick up the weapons you really like, and get 2 of them and just never get the other 3 and just don't spend your time doing that. But for week 8, you're going to spend 3 weeks here getting each of them. Like, it's going to come around 3 times, and you're going to want every single one of them. These weapons are amazing. So with that, that is the final of the Incarnon roundup. That means that all of those are done. There is a video for all of the non-circuit Incarnons. There's a video for each individual week of all of the Incarnons. So if you want to know about any of those weapons, they are all up to date now. I will see you guys in the next video, which was going to be a lot of them. I think that X-Scal is probably tomorrow, for those of you that are curious. And I'll see you then. Goodbye. Hey everybody, it's time to thank the patrons that are hanging around and supporting the channel. So, start with that. The $10 patrons are Atheon, Alex Barnum, Arbiter Daydream, Barkus, Benuven, Plotomatic, Brutus Salazar, Candelathra, Blob World, Dylan Dworsky, Athrain, James Harthorne, JC4 Science, Josh, Luzanth, Vicotel, Michta, Nerve, Ruby, Sanyu, Sharp247, The Coupon of Death, Waifu Wars, Wodad01, and Zarafir. Also, thanks, of course, to all of the other patrons for supporting the channel. It is much appreciated. It's a little sneak peek on what we're getting into. There's going to be a lot more of these kind of big re-reviews of weapon types and their new builds and stuff, as things changed a lot at the end of last year. And of course, there's also planned new free-to-play before we get into any more big updates. So look forward to that.